Hello, I'm going to tell you a story about a toad. Toad was lying in his bath. The bath was full of mud. Toad loved being in his bath. The soft mud, nice and warm, made him feel sleepy and drowsy. Anyway, it was 9 o'clock in the morning, so he decided to get out of his bath, which he'd been in for 1 hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, it doesn't matter, and admired himself in the bathroom mirror. He was tall and warty and shiny, just like Toad should be. Well, because he was a civilized toad, he put some clothes on. He put on some slacks, a shirt and a bow tie, and decided to go for a drive in the countryside. He climbed into his car, which was nice and big, had shiny bumpers, and drove up and down some hills, side to side, along in the countryside. Now, at the same time, another person decided to go for a ride in the countryside. Her name was the Queen. The Queen was a queen, and she lived in a castle, of course, which is where queens live. She decided to go for a drive. This queen was wearing a crown, because that's what queens do, and she drove in the countryside, up and down the hills, from side to side in the winding roads. Well, this queen drove a little bit fast, because she was that kind of queen. And as she was driving, the crown slipped down over one eye. "Oh dear!" she said. Now she spoke like this because she was a queen, and that's how queens speak. "Oh dear!" she said. As she struggled to keep the car on the road, she couldn't see a thing. Then, bump, bump, the car left the road and landed in the ditch next to the road. "Oh dear!" said the Queen. "What am I going to do?" Just round the bend came Toad, driving his car. "Oh dear!" said Toad. "What's this?" And he looked at the back end of the Queen's car, with the wheels still turning round and round, but going nowhere fast. Well, the Queen got out of her car. "Oh dear!" said the Queen, because that's what queens say, as she looked at her car stuck in the ditch. Toad drove up to the car and got out. "Oh dear," he said, "what am I going to do?" The Queen said, "What are you going to do? It's obvious. Get me out of here." "All right," said Toad. What will I do? I know. I've got some rope." So he got some rope, and he tied it to the back end of the Queen's car. He put the rope over his shoulder, and he pulled ever so hard. The car was heavy. He tried to heave it out of there. He hauled it. He felt harassed because he couldn't move the car. "Oh dear," he thought. And then he had an idea. He tied the rope to the back end of his car, and he reversed his car, and he pulled the Queen's car out of the ditch. "Oh, well done," said the Queen. She got very excited. "You've pulled the car out of the ditch." "Well," thought Toad, "I have, haven't I? It was heavy, but we heaved and we hauled, and out it came." "Well done," said the Queen. "That was absolutely super, Toad. That was so super, Toad." "Super? I know what. I'll call you Supertoad in future." "Well," thought Toad, "I've never been called Supertoad before now. Supertoad, I rather like that." As he stood there dressed in his slacks and shirt and bow tie, he thought, I think the name Supertoad fits. Then the Queen said, "Where's my crine?" "Your crine?" said Supertoad. "Yes, my crine." "Your crine? What's a crine?" "Don't be silly, Supertoad. A crine goes on one's head." "Oh," thought Supertoad. A crown." "Yes," said the Queen. "I said that already, my crine." "Oh," said Supertoad. "Have you lost it?" "Yes," said the Queen. "I was wearing it just now, and it's gone." "Oh," said Supertoad, "I'd better have a look." So he looked in the ditch. There was no crown there. He looked round the sides of the car. There was no crown there. He looked inside the car. There was no crown there. And then he thought, where haven't I looked? I'll look under the car. So he looked under the car, and there was the crown. But not just the crown. There was a grey furry animal, Ruth the rat. Supertoad said, "Ruth the rat, what are you doing down there?" "Well," said Ruth the rat, "it wasn't me. Honest, Gov. No, it wasn't me. I was just sitting here, and the crown kind of rolled down here." Well, thought Supertoad, there's something suspicious here, but one mustn't complain. We have found the Queen's crown. Let's give it back to her. So he picked up the crown, and he gave it to the Queen and said, "Here's your crown, your Majesty." "Well done, Supertoad," said the Queen. "I'm going back to my castle. I'm going to have a nice cup of tea." Well, thought Supertoad, that sounded like a jolly good idea. So the Queen got into her car and drove off. Supertoad got into his car and drove back to his house, where he had a nice cup of tea. The end.